and they had basically tested human connection and whether or not they would get better with that. And they found in some cases that the human bonding and human connection actually decrease some of the effects. Now, it didn't get all of the effects, but it decreased some of the effects of schizophrenia, specifically kind of the wild erratic behavior and things like that. So yeah, the anxiety and things like that. So the best thing that you can do, especially as the body of Christ, I mean, man, all of the one another's in Scripture speak to this issue, okay? They underscore it in big, bright highlight, right? That human connection and human bonding, and if someone would allow it, human touch is incredibly important. And so I would say for those who are not quote-unquote professionals, visiting an individual who has a particular illness, being there, giving them a hug, rejoicing with them, weeping with them, praying with them, praying for them while you're with them. All of these things add to treatment, right? And just on that scientific note, there are biological, observable things that go on in the brain when these connections and this bonding takes place. It's cool.
And God knew that. I think science is catching up with God every day. I would like to add, listen. Listen without your filter. Listen to the other person and try to listen for emotions behind the words. It's vitally important to disengage your filter and how you see things so that you can see how they're seeing and giving them permission to feel those feelings in front of you, with you, that you're not going to beat up on them in any way, shape, or form. That you're just there to listen. You just want to listen. You just want to understand. I believe, Pastor, isn't the word listen and understand in Hebrew the same word?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I would like to add to what he's saying. It's like, oh, wow, God knows what he's talking about. And science can prove it. And, of course, all truth belongs to God. Not just the truth that he's given to us recorded here, but all truth belongs to him. However, I want to add, you do have to be careful about people's bubbles, because we don't know what people have been through. You know, we just went through a series not too long ago, here in the church, where we were dealing with sexual predation and how are we made aware of it? How do we deal with it? How do we help people? And it's epidemic in our culture, and especially among children and women, some men, but women and children especially. And knowing that there have been some that have been through very traumatic experiences, you can't just come up and give them a big hug right off the bat if you don't know them. You may freak them out. But as our brother is saying, if you get to know them, you'll know what their bubble is and what they're comfortable with. And so we need to make certain that we're not just throwing off our love onto them, like a flood. We might need to come and make certain that
come down with it.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Steffi, do you want to add anything?
Sure.
Go for it.
Just to add to what everybody's saying, being on the other side, being more on the clinical side of things, I have so many people, and it breaks my heart. I have so many people that, and I see mostly women, and they will say, no one in my church has reached out to me. Not a single person. My pastor hasn't missed me. My Sunday school class hasn't missed me. I don't even think they want me there. I mean, I hear it often, almost from, and that's because, not because it's true, but because they're depressed, and they're sad, and they're anxious, and that fits into their framework. So I just wanted to make everybody aware that even the smallest gestures to people mean the world. In this day of technology, a quick Facebook message or a text or a card, which is unheard of anymore, anything, even just, and I'm praying for you, people in your church, if you notice they've disappeared, reach out to them, because they sadly may be out there thinking that people don't love them anymore, and it's just not the truth. And on my end, I try to help them know that. Like, maybe there's some other options there. Maybe people don't realize what's going on. Maybe you should let your pastor know, or maybe people, there's some care ministry there, but they can't read minds. But depressed people become self-focused. It's the nature of the illness, and don't realize that we can't read their mind. And we can do so much with just the smallest little gesture to even save lives sometimes. Not to get dramatic, but it's true. But to even save lives.
I have a very practical one.
Take them a casserole.
Yay.
Don't treat them any differently
Right.
than if they had cancer.
Well, yeah. And families need help and support in those psychiatric hospital stays. I mean, my husband, I don't know, he probably had like PBJs and, I mean, it was just us. But there are families out there when their loved one is going through something and something's off, even if they're not in a psych hospital, that they need another hand to help. So that's practical.
And I know that, Christopher needed constant encouragement because he was not understanding what you were dealing with. And so, he did need someone to keep telling him, you're doing the right thing, don't give up, hang in there. So yes,
Thank you.
the support group also needs support.
All right, we're gonna go into the last page here. Suicidality and risk factors. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. Stats from the National Institute of Mental Health. In an alarming rate, suicide has increased in prevalence over the last 10 years, especially in young people ages 10 to 34, where it is the second leading cause of death after accidents. This startling data does not have a causation or correlation to any specific patterns or variables. However, there are some risk factors and theories out there as to why suicide is so prevalent. Psychologist Thomas Joyner developed a response to why people decide to commit suicide. He says because they want to, because they can't. He also illustrates a Venn diagram of suicide theory where the 3 areas must be true to elevate the probability that someone attempts suicide. Feelings of isolation and loneliness, belief that one is a burden to others, and the capability for suicide. So, mental health professionals, what actions can anyone who knows someone is having suicidal thinking take?
Well, one common factor of someone who is or can be. One factor can be in someone who is approaching a spot where they're becoming suicidal is anger. Often have difficulties with anger and decide that they want to internalize that anger, and that often ends up in a suicide gesture or attempt. So we need to know about people when they're angry. We need to get them to talk about that if we can, and maybe find out what can be done about that. Whether it's something we can do personally, or if there's some sort of help that they need to reach out and receive. So knowing a person in a relationship is crucial, friendship if possible, and if they're struggling, all of us need to, have other people know to some extent what's going on with us, and if what's going on with us isn't necessarily good, it's painful, and it just is, and we want the pain to stop.
I think that we have to make a distinction between the intention of committing suicide and the thought of it. Because sometimes we go through situations where we just wish life would end, right? There's always thoughts associated behind it. Just because a thought is there, you shouldn't automatically jump to the intent is there. There's some things that we can assess, like, do they have the things available for committing suicide? We can do Likert scale, things like that. But usually when a person is, when I ask, if a person tells me that they're suffering from suicidal thoughts, I begin to start to assess. Okay, now how serious this is? Do you have the strength to carry out the plan, and do you have the means to carry out this plan? And then if they tell me, no, well, I just have thoughts of suicide, well, then we begin to talk about the origin of those. When did those begin? How did those begin? What were some of the things that were going on when these things began? And I attempt as best I can to try to normalize those, because all of us, to some extent, have painful memories, painful thoughts, and suicidal thoughts. We just don't carry those out. I think that there is a distinction that needs to be made between suicidal thinking itself, that you just have thoughts, right, and the intent to carry that out. If there's an intent, then that's a different story.
So with those two distinctions, someone who's thinking about it, what should they do? And versus what should the person who's intending to do it do?
Well, it depends on the person, and it depends on the situation. Sometimes a person has the intent or suicidal thinking, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, so somebody might have suicidal thoughts because of the out of balance brain chemistry. Maybe increased depression, anger, like you said, high anxiety, physical problems, things like that. Sometimes the problem is external. For instance, high sexual abuse, child abuse, PTSD, things like that. That's external, right? Sometimes it's a long period of possibly health problems and things like that over a long period of time. Person going through chronic illness, things like that, right? So it all depends on, there's no one magic, silver solution or anything else like that. It really depends on the person and the situation that they're involved in.
So what's the point of me being, like, when do I get to the point where I'm the family member and I'm feeling concerned for my loved one? When do I make a call to 911 versus do I schedule an appointment with a psychiatrist?
Well, two things. One, again, when it begins to start to disrupt what I believe social and occupational functioning. So when you see a person who's laying around, they have a sense of hopelessness. You hear that in the way they talk, in their affect, the way they look. You'll see it, right? In the way that they dress. Yes, it comes out of their conscience, right? So that's number one, is observing those particular outward behaviors. We all have outward behaviors, even though we don't think we do. We all express that and see that. That's number one.
Traumatized, they respond to something like that. Some sort of trauma, personal trauma.
The situation.
So yeah, and how they talk, how they think, how they behave, how they dress, and even then you want to assess that. Okay, so that's
So that's where you start to head in that direction.
right.
Okay. Does anybody have any other thoughts on that?
I did. You asked, when do you know when to call 911? When someone is threatening suicide and they tell you they're going to do it and they have the means to do it, you would much rather be safe than sorry. You call 911. Because you never, ever want regrets. Because it is, to go through someone who has had a family member or a friend commit suicide is one of the worst things you can walk through with someone. So if your gut even has an inkling that person may be in danger, whether they're in your house or somebody else's house,
Mhm.
you call 911. They might get mad at you, but they'll get over it, but they'll be alive.
Right.
And may I also add to your point too, oftentimes the suicide doesn't happen when they're depressed. It happens when they're on the upswing, because now they have the energy and the ability to carry it out. So
In fact, they may even be happy and they finally are at peace because they've got it planned.
right,
My, my mother-in-law died by suicide, and and I have been suicidal twice in my life. And the one thing I know is don't be afraid to talk about it with them. Ask them, are you suicidal? You may be the least trained and the most uncomfortable, but that question is important. Talking about it will not cause them to do it. What the problem is they need to talk about it, and that will more likely keep them from doing it. I had a period of almost 2 years where every time I saw a cemetery, I wanted to go lay down in it. I didn't want to be dead, but I wanted all the peace that came with being dead. And I didn't want to feel any more emotional pain. And I actually did lay down in a couple of them. Now, I have since laid down in the spot where I'm going to be buried, and my sister had a fit because it's in a little town of about 6,000. She's like, get up, everybody knows we have my boy. But I'm going to be 2 spots over from my dad, and he's buried, and so while I was there, I thought I'd try it out. But the bottom line is don't be afraid to talk about it with somebody. They need to talk. And secondly, just ask them to make one promise to you, that if they ever, and let's say they're just saying, no, and I don't have plans, I'm not, if they say they got plans, you call 911. If they don't have plans, you say, are you talking to somebody? And then you follow up on that. You find out, But the bottom line is I always tell them, would you promise me one thing? Before you'd ever act on it, you would call me. Just promise me that. Just one simple promise.
We're gonna skip the last section, because of time's sake. And we're gonna go into the Fresh Hope material, if that's okay with y'all. Because I think we covered the last section, throughout, just ongoing support. So Pastor Brad has 3 minutes.
I'll try 3 minutes,
Yeah.
5 minutes.
He's
I tell
gonna
myself
go
1 minute.
through-
He's a pastor, what does 3 minutes mean?
Yeah, and I'm going to have 3 closings to this sermon. And in closing,
But yeah.
Fresh Hope is strictly, we are the only faith-based organization in the United States. We are most likely the only one in the United States, including secular, that is all geared from someone with lived experience. Our materials are not created and done by psychiatrists or clinicians. They are based upon peer-to-peer, and that's, Secondly, all of our support groups, churches have them. They have to be sponsored by a church. They have to be, or a ministry. Like, for instance, a clinic could have them, or a hospital. But somebody has to be has oversight. They don't meet in people's homes or things like that. Thirdly, they are ongoing. It's just like AA. There's short-term interventions that are done by some organizations. There's one out of Texas called the Grace Alliance. They're friends of mine. Their material was written by a psychologist and a man whose wife had bipolar disorder. And short-term intervention works initially. Short-term intervention means like they have a 12-week course or a 12-week group. And so when people get done, they have new information, they have new tools. But if having a class on recovery was all it took, AA would have been doing this a long time ago. It's not how people learn, but it sure is how the church likes it. We like little things that start in September and end in November. You take time off for the holidays, you start again in January or February, and then you go till Easter, spring, and then you take the summer off. Well, that's not how mental health challenges work. And in fact, I always tell our teams, you need to be having it every week, and you need to have it during the holidays. Not necessarily on a holiday, but during the holidays. Also, we're the only support group system in the United States where our groups are made up of loved ones and those with a diagnosis. If she were my wife, which she's glad she's not, but if we went to a meeting together and she heard Katie make a statement that I've made before, but she hears Katie make it in a new way about bipolar disorder, she's going to hear it. And we've had people help. There's a cross-sectioning that happens. Our second half of the meeting is everybody breaks up. We have team groups. We we do trauma healing with groups out of the Healing Institute, which comes out of the American Bible Society. And we also then have we just started a pilot program with a support group for people who have lost loved ones to suicide. And also then I've been working in our county jail, and we have living free groups, and they're for people with dual diagnosis. And you know, I tell everybody, even on this panel, everybody got emotional issues, and if you think you don't, I have the spiritual gift of triggering people. I will come and live with you for 24 hours, and I will reveal where you have emotional issues. I just came from it naturally. My father was very good at it. I'm very good at it. My sister's even better. But quite honestly, emotional issues, everybody's got them. If you got the brain chemistry thing on top of it, it gets a little more complicated, okay? So anyway, that's what Living Free does, is deals with those. And if churches want to have a real strategic ministry with the homeless and with the jail ministries, if they want to be strategic in that, that would be a way to do it. We are also now on the process of starting, and I don't know how much you followed this, Katie, or know about it, but we're in the process of, we're about halfway through creating what we call Hope Coach training. And Hope Coaches, if any of you have ever heard of Stevens ministers, it's not like a Stevens minister. A Stevens minister in a church would be, they might visit grandma in the nursing home and help that way. Hope coaching is for people who are going through a crisis, feel hopeless, and these folks will be trained to do three things. Listen, listen, listen. No judgment, listening. Secondly, knowing strategic questions to ask to help pull the pain out of people, to help them process their pain. Thirdly, how to then speak from a clinical perspective and a practical way hope into that situation without giving somebody toxic positivity, which is really a problem. There's a lot of toxic Christianity out there. Then we are going to be hopefully designing Hope Navigators. And Hope Navigators could actually work on people's staffs, or they could be volunteers. The Hope Coaches are all volunteers, but a Hope Navigator would be somebody such as what is your name? No, Katie. I was going to call you Perry. I'm thinking Katy Perry in my head. See, I told you my brain wasn't fully on tonight. So in that process, somebody would be trained and certified as a peer support specialist, which are actual positions that states now offer and have, and Medicaid is even beginning to pay for in most of the states, because it's cheaper and it's as effective. And secondly, not as effective, let me phrase that a different way. It can be as effective, and it's cheaper, and states are, willing to throw a little more money at it, knowing they're going to get a lot more for that money. But this person, a Hope Navigator, would be trained as a certified peer support specialist, a wellness specialist, as well as a Hope specialist, and they would have to have lived experience. But they could be on a church staff, they could be a volunteer, there could be 3 or 4 of them in a church or whatever. And nationally, there's a number of us that do this, such as myself and Matt Stanford and others, where we're working on putting that together so that churches don't have to figure that out. And so this we call this our 411 sheet. And then the resources, we tell clinicians in every region where we have groups that what the groups are. We have it in Spanish, we have it in English. You can attend an online group if there's not a local group. We have the #1 Christian mental health podcast on iTunes. We have 69, I can never remember, I'm not a numbers person, groups across the United States in 25 different states and 4 different countries. And
Is this the name of your mental health podcast?
yep, it's Fresh Hope for Mental Health is the podcast.
Very cool.
And this sheet has all the stuff on there. And we interview people for our podcasts, like I'll probably get a hold of some of these folks and do a podcast interview with them. And we interview peers who are living well. For instance, I really promote Katie's blog as much as I can, and I created a group the other day because from a national perspective, when the pastor out in Southern California committed suicide or died by suicide a week and a half ago, and he had a ministry for people going through depression at Greg Laurie's church. It broke my heart because no one, especially, but pastors deal with so much stuff. He may have this really great church here, but let me tell you, it's hard being a pastor. It is. And now that I'm not one, I can talk about it. But let me tell you, the thing is that the voices of those who have a diagnosis that are living well is seldom heard. It's like going to, I spoke at Saddleback's first mental health conference that they had, and Kay Warren had ordered one of my books and then asked me to come out and speak, and I've gotten to know them somewhat. I know her better than I do him. But here's the deal. Whenever you go to a mental health conference, it's always clinicians, and it's the parents of the child who doesn't get help, or the spouse, or whatever. And I liken that to, my wife had breast cancer about 12 years ago. This week she found out she has to have the implant replaced because the implants are causing cancer. And so she has to go through the surgery, part of it anyway, again. But when she was sick, I felt like I was going to, when I went to some of these mental health conferences, that it was like going to a thing about breast cancer, and the doctors talked about it, the nurses talked about it, the social workers talked about it, and the husbands got up and talked about it. But no one that had survived breast cancer got up and talked about it. So the voice of those of us who have mental illness has to come forward, because we are the loudest voices of hope for those who have it. So that's what Fresh Hope is about.
Thank you for sharing that. That's great. Well, that is our panel discussion. We'd like to open up the floor now to Q&A, so I'll take a mic around, and if anybody has any questions, don't be shy.
I'll take the microphone.
Oh.
I just want to know, is this David Letterman here tonight? I looked at you and I thought for sure, this isn't Indiana, is it?
You're in Missouri, buddy.
Yeah.
I don't need the mic, I can talk very loud.
For the recording.
No, for the recording.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Sure, what you have to say will be wonderful.
Okay, no, I don't think it'll be wonderful, they're not gonna like what I have to say.
It won't be wonderful.
No, first of all, you all make it sound like anybody can walk in anywhere and get therapy or get help or get counseling. And it's not so. We have people who try to get counseling and they struggle to get counseling. And also the other thought I had was, when you're talking to a person who has mental illness, as in split personalities, we deal with a lady who's had 7 personalities and there's one left, altered, she calls them. And when you're talking to her, the last thing she wants to hear is biblical scriptures and verses. It doesn't penetrate, it only makes it worse. So common sense tells me that you have to discern it a little more than what maybe a pastor would. You have to discern where they're at that moment. And maybe there's just sitting silent and not the preaching. And that's kind of what I took from some of what you all were saying. It's not easy to get help. I wish it was easy. That's all I had to say.
And there's also, clinicians will know, how do you say the word when people who have a mental illness do not know that they have a mental illness?
Anosognosia.
Yeah, it's easy for her to say. There is such a thing. And I just spoke in San Antonio recently, and I spoke with the chairperson of the NAMI, And one of the things that she was very happy to hear me say is, I believe there are times when the brain gets diseased enough and there are times where you can't, people have been ill numerous times and you can't bring them back, you can't get them back. And the mental illness is serious, and when it's left untreated, it is deadly. And so is hopelessness. And because there's sometimes not everybody can, even if they go to get help, can get the level of help that they may need. But that's why for me, I'm driven with everything we offer is free. You know what I'm saying? Because it is the inaccessibility of care and the roadblocks that are there for many people, even when they finally come to terms to want it, it's not there.
These people that I'm making reference to do know they have mental illness.
Sure. Oh yeah.
It's
It can
something
be.
that they have dealt with for many.
Sure.
A lot of people know they have mental illness, but don't have the possibility of getting the help they need. Okay, all that set aside, I just want you to know it's not easy to get the help. Counselors, therapists, and psychiatrists cost money. Insurance don't pay for all that kind of help.
Right.
Now, we're not all in a position to go and get the help like you're talking about right now. A lot of people in nursing homes aren't able to get out and go to these meetings. It's a little more complicated than I feel like what you're talking about. And Katie, my heart goes out to you. I have a daughter with mental illness. She doesn't know she has it yet. But anyway, I congratulate you and applaud you for what you've done here tonight.
Practically, for the state of Missouri, the Department of Mental Health funds through Medicaid the different clinics like Compass here, and Pettis County is Burrell, I think to the west of us in Jackson County is Comprehensive, you said? Comprehensive, Discover, so there's different clinics that are, if they are in the diagnosing, like they have a qualifying diagnosis and they don't meet the income level, there is sliding scale for some, but there's also free programs to them available, like community support specialists. If they're wanting to get support, they have free counseling for those programs too, just so you know.
We are not a medical facility, but we have never turned anyone away because of finances, never. So it might help sometimes just to talk to somebody that has some experience and some training from that respect, you know, because they can't go to another place. But we've never turned anybody away because of finances.
I just wanted to say that, ma'am, you're right. I don't like what you have to say, but it's true.
Thank you
So
very
thank
much.
you for saying it.
Thank you. I appreciate
We-
it because you're not completely hearing what I'm saying.
I think I hear what you're saying. We have a
Thank
very
you.
broken system.
Yes.
Thank you.
We have a
Appreciate
broken
that.
system. Our public health care system for mental health is very broken. You might end up seeing a therapist 2 times and you go back and the next time you go, your therapist is gone. There's no notice. You get another therapist. It's hard to get good quality care if you don't have insurance sometimes. Not always, but sometimes.
Even if you have good insurance,
And even
it's
if you
hard.
have good insurance, it can be very hard to get good quality care. And I wanted to address the second thing. Again, I don't like it. You're right. It's not happy stuff. So the first thing is, it is challenging to get good quality care. Our system's broken.